What are your thoughts on what's going on? Maybe like tariffs, the whole reciprocation, the refinancing of the debt, the 10 years going up now, the 30 years going up now, treasuries and the yield in America. So kind of looks like the plan is backfiring, but there are many opinions around it.
Yeah, look, the 10-year Treasury yield is now today higher than where it was on Liberation Day. The initial feedback that everyone had was they are doing tariffs to scare the market into treasuries, which will drive the yield down, which will allow the U.S. to refi the $6 to $9 trillion of debt they've got to refi this year. I was like, okay, let's see how this pans out. And it looked like it was working for about 4 days. And then, of course, China needed some liquidity, so they dumped $50 billion worth of U.S. treasuries out of their $700 and something billion stash. And it basically reversed the progress that the Trump administration was making on the 10-year. If the goal, by the way, the goal here has never been stated by the Trump administration on the 10-year, right? The only goal has been we need to reorganize trade because everyone's been taking advantage of America and we need to reorganize that trade. That's the goal for the Trump administration that's been stated. So when that, after 4 days, the 10-year yield started reversing, it just completely invalidated to me the Bitcoiner theory that the plan was to bring down the treasury yield, because it's like, how can it, if that's the plan, which by the way the Trump administration has never said, but Bitcoiners have said it, right? Because everyone's looking for a cope mechanism. It's like, well, what happened? The big bad powerful Trump daddy presidency just failed in 4 days because of China. Like it didn't make sense to me the moment the treasury yield started climbing. So I started thinking about it, and literally this morning, I think something clicked for me, and I realized like there's multiple facets going on here, right? And if I was to think from a game theory perspective, and I'm President Trump and I'm talking to Jerome Powell, and I know that what the market needs is liquidity and lower interest rates, I would look at that and I would go, well, what's the fastest way for me to deliver longer term, lower interest rates, not just for the refinancing, but for the duration of my presidency? Well, I don't think it's as complicated as what people think. I think it's as simple as I need to deliver a credible solution, a credible moment for the Federal Reserve to have credibility in lowering interest rates and pumping liquidity. So how do you do that? Well, the simplest way to do that is to break something. The advantage here is that if you break something this time around, and that breaking something coincides with world trade being reorganized in favor of the U.S., you get several things accomplished here, right? Number one, you reorganize world trade in the favor of the U.S., and there's basically two teams here, right? There's the U.S. team, and then there's the China team. You had to tariff everyone because what happened last time was that China started moving their factories to jurisdictions that had lower tariffs and circumventing tariffs. So you had to tariff everyone in order to prevent that from happening. So by introducing these tariffs, you start reorganizing world trade towards in favor of the U.S. Good. That's one thing checked off. Secondly, you force China to make a misstep. And in this scenario, everyone's complimenting China on dumping those treasuries and basically serving the U.S. A quote unquote piece of its own medicine, right? What if that was the actual plan? What if the plan was we get China to dump their treasuries at an accelerated pace, which basically defangs them long term, with short-term pain, sure, but it defangs them long term. And in terms of that, short-term pain, it actually helps because now it breaks the bond markets worldwide. So the treasury yield, the 10-year yield jumps up and starts skyrocketing, which actually breaks the market. And what does that do? It serves up a credible scenario where the Federal Reserve can come in, actually lower rates, actually pump liquidity into the markets. In addition to that, you're seeing the China US dollar trade completely depeg, which forces China to devalue its currency by 20 to 40% now upcoming, which completely ruins the credibility of BRICS, right? Because it's like, how can you trust China to maintain this? Which then forces the European Union and the UK markets to also print and pump liquidity and lower interest rates because their yields are going through the roof at this morning, which then ultimately allows the US a complete, like, you get complete credibility in forcing the Fed to lower, or allowing the Fed to lower interest rates and pump liquidity, because now everyone else is doing it and it's created instability in worldwide markets. So you've got US trade aligned, you've got China less empowered from a frontal force attack, and you've got what you wanted. Like, it's like, maybe it's as simple as we just got to break the fucking thing in order to allow what we want to happen.
Yeah. I don't have a background in this, but sometimes it helps when I'm like strategizing about what is happening. And I don't remember which podcast it was, but I once heard people talk about kind of like the approach in China where they actually realize that following the American model has brought them a lot, but that it's not sustainable in the long run, right? So copying basically what sort of like the capitalist idea and the fiat money, etc. But that they realized that's not for the long term, and that they were like doing like controlled demolition in to a degree, right? Like with what's that called? Was that Evergreen, or like all these real estate developers, right? And it with what you just said, I'm thinking like, yeah, it's America is in that sense still in control if they want to do the same thing because they need to, right? Because I think many people agree that the entire plumbing, it's such a mess. Like, if you want to create a reset, I agree with you. Something has to break, and now it's kind of like a tug of war of like who is in control. But I think America originally created this game.
Of course, right? Yeah. So, I mean, globalization was an American export, right? So, and now what they've decided is that because we now have advancements coming in robotics, AI, and this, that, and the other, we don't need all of this manufacturing overseas. Now, ultimately, and again, I might be completely wrong. I'm just thinking through this, going, maybe it's not as fancy and as smart as what people really think it is, and maybe it's as simple as, we've got to break the fucking thing. And so in order to deliver that credibility to the Fed, what do we have? Everyone thinks that the treasury yield's got to go down. What if the plan is the exact opposite? What if the plan is we take the 10-year yield to 7%, which forces the Fed to jump in because it breaks the plumbing of all of the markets worldwide, right? And then, I think there's multiple facets here. I might be completely wrong, but at this point, everyone's just coming up with their own theories. And until the White House comes out and says this was the plan, you're never gonna know. We're all just hypothesizing here. Look, when it comes to China, yeah, China has benefited a lot from this, and the deal was they've got to buy U.S. treasuries, and now they've proven themselves as an adversary, and so the U.S. has to set them straight, basically, right? And how do you set them straight? You basically, all of these trading partners that you thought you had because of your Belt and Road initiatives are now suddenly on our side. It's a straight up, mafia move on the side of the U.S., and it is what it is. Like, if you've got, China's probably very disappointed at the lack of loyalty that they've received from the world and their perceived partners in the world. They're probably disappointed in the fact that the U.S. basically tariffed everyone, and the reason why they had to tariff everyone is, like I said, China was moving factories around the world to different jurisdictions to avoid the tariffs last time. So now it's like you tariff everyone. for the temporary moment. And I bet you what's going to happen is in those deals that are negotiated, they're going to put exemptions in there for Chinese companies coming in and setting up factories. They're going to tell these countries, you want to trade tariff-free with us, you better not have any Chinese-owned factories, right? So then eventually what you have, once this whole thing shakes out, is you have Team USA and Team China. And the USA basically goes tariff-free for everyone who's Team USA. And then you just got a basic brawl in essence.
Yeah.
Bitcoin custody is evolving, and while self-custody is important, it has its own risks and trade-offs. OnRamp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your custody setup. OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated cold storage multi-signature vault, guarded by 3 independent institutional-grade custodians, none of which have unilateral control. Your funds are fully auditable on-chain, cannot be rehypothecated, and can only move or withdrawn at your explicit direction. Multi-institution custody removes the technical, mental, and physical burdens of private key management, providing unparalleled peace of mind for you and your loved ones. Bitcoin is money, and as the price continues to appreciate, OnRamp helps you seamlessly tap into financial services like trading, inheritance, insurance, loans, IRAs, and more, all without compromising on security or accessibility. Check out onrampbitcoin.com through the link below and schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team to get to know them and learn more about their offering.
Bitcoin is financial sovereignty, so why compromise when you need liquidity? Meet Debify, the Bitcoin-backed lending platform made by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Debify connects you to institutional-grade liquidity and allows you to borrow fiat or stablecoins, all while keeping your Bitcoin 100% under your control with a non-custodial 3 out of 4 multi-sig escrow solution. Get competitive rates from a global marketplace of institutional-grade lenders, with loan terms that you choose, from 1 month up to a year. There are no hidden fees and there is no rehypothecation, just pure Bitcoin-aligned lending with the highest level of transparency and security. Are you ready to unlock liquidity without ever selling a single sat? Go to debify.com/Bram, that's BRAM, to check out their current lending offers. That's debify.com/Bram. Yeah, I think it's just interesting to just jam about, because obviously it's very complex. I think either way, the printer is coming, right?
Yeah. That's for sure.
That's what it looks like. Yeah, and also the multipolarity in the world is also accelerating. And I wonder what you think. I don't know if you saw my tweet, but I was wondering, I tweeted, once the trade war dust settles and dozens of accords have been signed, because that's what they're eventually going to do, right? Like now is like the chaos phase, but I think I saw Besant yesterday who said, like, there's now already 70 countries that want to negotiate with the US. Yeah, obviously, you saw Taiwan say 0%, Vietnam say 0%. That is what you're seeing. But so once those accords have been signed, do you think that countries or blocs will happily trade using a currency someone else controls? Or do you think the need for a neutral, decentralized alternative becomes clear? That's kind of my thought there. I don't know if it's going to happen that fast, but yeah, how do they trust each other again after this tit for tat?
What you need is a long-term deal, right? And this is where the argument of having a Bretton Woods 2.0, which is what Besant is talking about himself, is more relevant, right? If you get all these countries in the room and say, right, you're all Team USA, therefore we are now going to negotiate basically on Team USA's behalf. And whoever's on Team China is going to face a tariff. Whoever's in Team USA is going to, stick to these particular rules, including not allowing Chinese factories and all this other stuff. And that's it. That's just how the world gets separated. It's exactly what happened with Bretton Woods. And then the US has a more US-centric trade deal worldwide.
I wonder what Europe is going to do. What do you think?
Here's what Europe's going to do. Europe's going to get fucked. That's what's going to happen. In this scenario, Europe is going to get fucked because Europe has not realized that it needs to be on the US side here. Because Europe is trying to organize through the EU, basically a competitor to the United States. And the United States will dismantle that, like they did with the whole Ukraine-Russia thing. I mean, they've set Europe back 20 years with the energy, just based on energy. So I don't have faith that the EU is smart enough to deal with this. If anything, it will cause fracturing amongst the EU and cause Europe to decide, different ways that countries want to go. Basically, the country that wins inside of Europe is the first country that realizes that they need to side with the US. And I hope it's the United Kingdom, because we have the ability to do it. We're not in the EU, and yet we're acting like patsies.
I saw Germany was talking about getting the gold from New York and all these things. And I agree. I think Europe is very fractured, just by definition. In my view, the EU is a concoction with a flawed foundation. And I think the idea is interesting.
When's Nexit coming?
I don't think that's coming, but no. But I think it's probably also harder in Europe to have some sort of strategy and forward-looking also ideology. Well, they have some sort of ideology, but when I hear them talk, like you said, like, we're going to be a competitor in manufacturing to the US, etc. I think like, no, I don't know. I'm not seeing that. So I also think actually the opportunity for Europe would be to be the bridge between America and let's say the East and China. But in general, the reaction to the whole thing with Zelensky and Vance and what Vance said in Munich, I think has been very. I'm no political expert, but I think it's very childish. Like, it's a tantrum, right? Like, now America is bad, right? Yeah, just because they are focusing on themselves, and I think that's my main argument. It has a bad effect on where I'm living, but I'm understanding that America is going inwards and looking to fix stuff for themselves. I mean, like you said, like this year it's like between 7 and 9 trillion. Within 4 years, it's like 24 or 26 trillion. They have a huge problem, right? So if that is not at least if there's not even an attempt to do something about that, then they're fucked either way. As history has also shown, in lots of other countries. So, like, I understand that they are focusing on themselves, and it feels like Europe is not really grateful for kind of like the free lunch for the past 60 years or something. That's kind of my view on their reaction to that.
Well, look, every relationship is based on value that you bring, right? So the EU should be sitting there going, okay, what is the value that we bring? By the way, the same thing, the UK should be sitting there going, what is the value that we can bring based on a world order that's going on? And clearly, the world order is a battle between the US and China at this point. And by the way, this is not new for the US, right? They had it with Japan, they had it with the Soviet Union, they had it with all these people. And now, the US's financial engineering department is pretty good, right? And so they basically financially engineer themselves into a position of strength. Whether that's using, hot tactics or just soft tactics, they do it. And I think the first country that realizes that in Europe is going to be the one that benefits. And like I said, I hope it's the UK.
I do think that would undermine what they want as the EU, as some sort of cohesion.
Of course.
Right? Like, and that would kind of, that would definitely have a ripple effect. Okay, so I want to switch to Bitcoin. I saw you recently said something that you saw like a tectonic shift in how TradFi perceives Bitcoin, especially, like last week when the Nasdaq was tanking, we had some sort of decoupling. Now we have a recoupling and then a decoupling.
It wasn't a decoupling. That's all. I've never used that word. And
no, not you, but like that's the conversation. I mean, that's
And that word is wrong, because for a decoupling to occur, you would need Bitcoin to compete for safe haven status with the US dollar. And the only time that happens is when the US dollar gets replaced. So that's not going to happen. So everything is on a risk curve against the US dollar. Real estate, bonds, gold, Bitcoin, whatever. It's on a risk curve. Now, that doesn't mean it's a risk on asset from the perception of a Bitcoiner, but from an investment perspective, it is on a risk curve. And Bitcoin is the furthest thing to the right-hand side of that risk curve. And, on last Friday, we had a scenario where the NASDAQ was down 6% in a day. The VIX, the fear index, was pumping 50% in a day, and Bitcoin was up. That has never happened before, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a decoupling, but that is a moment where TradFi stops and goes, what the fuck is going on here with this asset? Why is this? How can the NASDAQ be down 6% and Bitcoin be up, let alone the VIX pumping 50% in a day? That is a monumental tectonic shift in the perception of Bitcoin from a TradFi perspective. And that's what happened. It was great to see.
I think, I tweeted this. That was my most bullish day in 11 years in Bitcoin, I think, to really see it at that stage. But yeah, so what do you think is driving that change? I mean, we saw BlackRock talking about Bitcoin is risk off. Is it like stuff like that helps with it? Or do you see that, TradFi is kind of forced to take it into consideration because, it just is like it's there. People are using it. And this is just a point where they should actually consider it. Or are there any other things that drive that?
Yeah, from my perspective, I've been shouting about it on Twitter, on YouTube and Twitter for 2 years now, is the world changed for Bitcoin on June 15th, 2023, which is when BlackRock filed the ETF application. BlackRock is now basically commandeering the entire US government and everyone else that's involved in that operation as well, which is fantastic. And they've now got the whole C-suite of the US government basically pro-Bitcoin. The director of the FBI owns Bitcoin, right? Like this is a monumental shift in the perception of this asset. And it can only be good. Yeah, this. If anyone thinks this is happening by accident, you don't understand how the real world works. BlackRock has decided that Bitcoin is going to be a competitor to gold for the moment. BlackRock themselves have called gold a shiny rock. It's just shocking. Like, what world are we living in where BlackRock is coming out calling gold a shiny rock and Bitcoin being a store of value? What world are we living in when the Treasury Secretary of the United States of America gets asked about gold and he pivots to Bitcoin and says Bitcoin is becoming a store of value? Like, this is not happening by accident. This is a orchestrated movement to make Bitcoin a store of value asset.
I would agree. I think one thing I've learned from more like a corporate type of experience, and when people in certain places say what is like, that is not random, like that is part of some sort of strategy or at least agreement between multiple people. Like, okay, this is like the talking points, or this is like the line of conversation that we're following. And I think I was just as surprised as you when Scott Besant's answer was about Bitcoin. Yeah, that's wild. And I also think that when you hear him talk, for example, at the All In podcast interview, I thought it was really great. Like, he sounds like a very professional, considerate, experienced guy who actually had this stint with Soros and the Bank of England. Like, he was there, right?
Well,
so he knows this.
He placed those trades to break the Bank of England.
Yeah, so he knows his stuff. And that's kind of been a signal to me, I think, also along the way in a Bitcoin journey. Like, when certain people with certain stature that you do kind of like verify for yourself, you listen to him talk, to them talk, like you listen to their argumentation. When they start talking about Bitcoin, like Scott Bessent, like, yeah, he understands what this is 100%. Like, he would never talk about it if he doesn't understand what this is. Like, you and me.
You got Howard Lutnick. Howard Lutnick, before he took position as Commerce Secretary of the United States, went on stage at the Bitcoin conference last year and said Cantor Fitzgerald owns a shit ton of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Like, and now he's the Commerce Secretary of the United States. They also own $1 billion of MicroStrategy. You think these things are good? What, they're going to just fail?
Random. Yeah, I know. Yeah, and I think it's you don't have to see a lot of signals to actually build your conviction on Bitcoin. It's more about accepting that it, yeah, like you said, like that it works like this. Like, why would these people talk about it if they don't?
The reality right now, at this point in 2025, is that Bitcoin has been de-risked 50 times, right? And if you still don't get it, you are simply an idiot.
I don't understand why people are not paying attention. You know, the same as with last week when I think in Thailand they halted trading, and in Japan they stopped the short selling. You know, and then I was thinking, if you are participating in that game and that happens, it should signal to you that that's a rigged game.
Yeah, but the thing is that when you're in TradFi markets, you know it's a rigged game. Like no one dealing in TradFi markets besides, you know, the fucking day traders think that it's not a rigged game. Everyone in true finance, in true TradFi, knows it's a rigged game. That's why they play it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and that's why like all the general plebs are not actors in this game, right? They are subjects.
Exactly, which is why the best thing that anyone can do is just hold the asset. When there's times of extreme volatility like this, what are you going to do? Try and play against the high frequency trading robots that have been professionally tweaked for 20 years to move markets in directions in certain speeds and with certain velocity. Do you think you're going to beat that? Like, you're just an idiot.
I use that point a lot where I say, like, there's trading firms that have their own satellites for internet so that they're like just a little bit faster than the rest, right? Like, yeah, and then you're going to be on your Robinhood app or whatever. You're going to try to play that. Like,
yeah, because you watch someone on fucking YouTube tell you that they've entered a trade. It's like, what are we talking about?
Yeah. So, yesterday I tweeted, it's like modern money gives you perpetual anxiety. Like, you have to do stuff all the time. And, Bitcoiners just chill, even when the exchange rate with dollars go down.
Yes, there is a huge activity bias in humans. And I think this comes from, having been, there's been a financial subjugation of the human population for 230 years. It's called fiat money. And as a result of that, you always think you're getting fucked, which means you always feel like you have to be doing something.
Yes.
It just, people have to get rid of that condition. Until they do, they're never going to get it.
I think that's why people also get into crypto and shitcoins before they actually Bitcoin, right? I mean, myself included, like that. I think people think like that is the game, but the game is actually, stay solvent, stay humble, stack sats.
It's exactly what the wealthiest have been doing forever. The game has never changed. They just know how to use debt, right? So the X factor on the super wealthy is that they know how to use debt in the right way, whereas the average person is going to go and get credit cards and variable debt and all this other stuff, whereas the absolute wealthiest have access to fixed rate terms that you just don't have access to. Right, I can call Citibank Private up right now and ask for a facility on certain assets, and they'll do it. They'll give you a rate that the average person is never going to get.
You have been talking about getting to one Bitcoin, studying Bitcoin. Get into Bitcoin for a while, yeah. And recently, we've seen. In the last few months, we've seen about like 500,000 Bitcoin move from retail to institutional. And I bring up a tweet from Checkmate that I quote posted about, most short-term holders are now obviously underwater, right? And I said something like, this is the time where hodlers are born. Like, either you panic sell because you don't understand it yet, or if you did the work, then this is like your first real moment of like your own personal conviction, and the people that sell now later will realize that they fumbled the bag, and then it kind of like that little step in the journey starts over again, right? And they're trying to catch up to what they sold. Are there any other new things that we should tell people about why they should get into Bitcoin? I mean, there's a lot of Bitcoin moving to institutions. We are now in this phase where we have this drawback of obviously in a general macro chaos moment, but that doesn't really matter. Yeah, is it like, yeah, if you don't get it, then you're fucked, or yeah,
Yeah.
are there any other things?
No, there isn't. There's so much. There is more education on Bitcoin that's available for free than any other asset or industry that I've ever been a part of. Right? When I was in real estate, I didn't have people on the internet telling me, oh, this particular deal is available in Canary Wharf in London. No. Why? Because real estate works like this. I have to get the deal, I have to seal the deal. And even if I've signed a contract on that deal, it's not done until I own it. So I can't tell anyone about it until I own it. And then once I own it, you don't have access to that deal. The difference with Bitcoin is no matter how much wealth you've got, no matter how much money you've got, no matter how much access you've got, no matter how many contacts you got, the only difference that you get and I get in Bitcoin is the price at which we purchase. That's it. There's no massive premiums. There's no massive advantage. That's the first time in human history that has ever been an asset that can scale that has that.
Mm-hmm. It's again, and I'm coming across this a lot lately. Like, it's again why Bitcoin sounds too good to be true, because it's so simplistic. Like, if this is the core, like, it's very simplistic, like, it's very paradoxical compared to, you know, what people know from the fiat money investing game and stocks and
The
what we just
subjugation. It's the subjugation. It's like you're told, like, okay, in order, how many people go to real estate seminars to learn about how to get a real estate deal? Right? I was in this industry. You get people showing up, paying for seminars to hopefully get close enough to the deals, and then they have to pay fees to get access to these deals, and then they have to compete with other people to get access to these deals. And the person holding the deal, in which case, in my scenario, it was me, gets to decide what deal you get based on what I've negotiated, and I'm always going to favor myself.
Yeah,
right. I'm always
that's the bigger game. You mean also?
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah, like that. But that doesn't exist with Bitcoin, and people don't like it because they actually get a fair deal, and most people are basically used to getting fucked to the point where if they're not getting fucked, they don't feel right.
If you have your Bitcoin in self-custody, where are you keeping your Bitcoin seed words? For me, there's only one way, and it's backing up my seed phrase with stamp seed. It's a single durable plate without any parts or materials. Stamp your words into solid titanium, which is fire-resistant, water-resistant, and built to last. Unlike etching or engraving, stamp seed's patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, making it easy for you to protect your generational wealth. Don't risk losing your seed phrase on paper. Get a stamp seed plate for unmatched protection. You can use code BRAM, that's BRAM, for 15% off at stampseed.com.
How do you look back on that, like being active in that game and now like Bitcoin? I mean, it's totally different.
Completely different, but that's the game, right? So you have to play the game the way it's presented. I don't go around crying about the game. The game is the game. So when I was in real estate and my job was to secure a deal and not let anyone else get that deal, that's the game that I played because that was the rules of the game. Now we're in Bitcoin, and luckily for me, I'm at a point where I have financial resources. I have the ability to, it's been 2 years. I've not taken a single sponsor. Monetization is not on YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. I've not sold a single thing, right, with YouTube. Like, I don't have to. That doesn't mean it won't change in the future, but I don't have to do that. So I get to sit here and go, okay, what's my mission now? And the mission for me has been trying to get people like my parents, who've got a net worth of $500,000 to $30 million in that range, into one Bitcoin. Really, I've said, I've been honest about this in the past. I don't care about the broke pleb. They don't matter to me, right? The beautiful thing about Bitcoin is they can actually utilize the information that I'm saying and actually benefit from it. But in real estate or in equities or in gold, the more money you have, the more access you get to different information because the information is usable based on the amount of money you have. In Bitcoin, that's not the case, right? Which is the beautiful thing about Bitcoin and Bitcoin education. I can be talking to a real estate investor with a $15 million portfolio, and someone with $5,000 in the bank can benefit from that. But that doesn't mean that that's my intention. My intention has always been, and I've never lied about this, is to talk to people like my parents who have spent 35 years trying to do the right thing build a property portfolio, leave a legacy, pay their taxes, do the right fucking thing, and are getting screwed over now because they're just gonna get rug pulled on what is the store of value asset. Yeah. So that was always my intention. I really don't care about what the lower end of the economy does. They've always been broke to me. They're always gonna be broke, and they'll use Bitcoin as a savings tool if they're smart.
Really hope I do really hope we can reach those people, but I also what I did learn along the way is that there's also a certain you probably don't like the word, but certain like privilege in having the time to actually figure this out, right? Like if you're struggling, you know, and you do want to save.
Wait, why wouldn't I like that word?
No, I mean like just the word privilege. I don't even know. Maybe it's me. I don't even. Yeah. Well, I mean, it is true.
Everything I've ever done in my life is to gain privilege. Everything. I started working to gain privilege. I started making connections to gain privilege. I started making money to gain privilege. I started making sure that I had generational net worth so that when my children get it and their children get it, they have privilege. That's the point. The name of the game is privilege, right? It's just that people don't have it, turn around and say, oh, you know, other people have privilege because they fucking worked for it or someone in their bloodline worked for it.
Fair point. I think
I just wanted to correct. I love it.
Okay, brother. Okay.
Bitcoin is privilege, by the way.
Yes.
Name me another privilege point that you have where you can own an asset, where you can go to work, you can save, you can own an asset that nobody else can print away from you. Nobody else can build away from you. Nobody else can launch a private equity company away from you. Nobody else can do that. That's privilege. You have Bitcoin privilege.
Yeah.
We're all in it for privilege, my friend.
I think I agree. I agree. I agree. I think where I wanted to go is more like it's just hard to understand. You know, Bitcoin is hard to understand. Just in general, money is hard to understand in general. You know, understanding the rigged fiat game is hard. And so you need some sort of time and space to actually get to understanding that, if that makes sense, right? So
but that's why look at the beauty of Bitcoin, right? You're here, I'm here. Before us, people were here. How did I learn about Bitcoin? I went on YouTube. Right, I read Saifedean's book again. So who had the privilege there? Because I was listening to the fucking book during COVID. Everyone else had time, right?
Yes, that is true.
Right, so it's like, look, at the end of the day, you know, compared to every other asset class, look how easy it is to learn about Bitcoin, and morons are not doing it. They're launching meme coins.
I 100% agree with you, right? Like I'm saying Bitcoin is an asymmetric opportunity based on publicly available information, you know, and anyone can find that information. Anyone can verify that information. So I agree with you. I think the only thing I wanted to say is on this journey of talking to lots of different people, I did realize that there's also some sort of privilege, either earned or not. I don't really know, probably earned, but to figure this out and to then capitalize on it or get value from it or however you want to call it. So
that is the one point then that we disagree on, because if there is if working hard to understand something is a privilege, right? Like then nothing is deserved in the world. Like that's what we do. We work hard. You worked hard to understand Bitcoin. I worked hard to understand Bitcoin. We come from different backgrounds. Everyone in Bitcoin comes from wherever they come from, and they've spent the time to figure it out, and they've spent the time to be intelligent enough not to get sucked into other things, or pivot from other things into Bitcoin and go through sitting through. You know, I tell people always say, "Oh, you bought Bitcoin really early." I'm like, yeah, sure. I didn't buy it early, firstly, by my fucking standards, right? But I bought it at let's say somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000 a coin. And then people always say, oh, you bought it really early. I'm like, I know people that are buying it at $250 a coin now, right? That was really early. And then it's like, okay, well, what about the journey, right? So I bought it $5,000 to $8,000 a coin. I rode it up to $64,000 a coin, rode it down to $34,000 a coin, rode it back up to $69,000 a coin, rode it down to $15,500 a coin, and then rode it back up to $100,000.
I mean, same here, right? I bought between like 100 and 300, 400, and I sold it all at 4,000, which felt amazing, right? But now I have less than before, and that's also part of it, right? Like that's the fumble that I mentioned before. Yeah, you have to go through that. So yes, I agree with you. Like you have to do work to eventually get some sort of advantage. I just hope we can reach as many people as possible. But then again, like you can only orange pill yourself, right? So we can talk about this. We can hopefully
listen to this. Yeah. Look how lucky the world is. Look how lucky the world is that you and I are sitting here talking about taking time out of our day to sit here and talk about the most asymmetric bet in the entire world and trying to take our time to actually explain it. Look how lucky, look how amazing the world is from that perspective. This doesn't happen in real estate. This doesn't happen in equities. People think this happens everywhere. It doesn't happen. I'm telling you, it doesn't happen. When I get a deal, when I used to get deals in real estate, I used to call four people.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. How are we going to take advantage of this deal? And then whatever we say, say for 24, 25 unit development, right? There's going to be 10 units taken, and now there's only 15 for everyone else. We're going to front load the discounts on all of our units and give people a worse deal so that we can get the better deal on our 10 units. That's how real estate works.
Yeah. I agree with that perspective. I think we are both drawn to talking about Bitcoin and sharing about it. And yes, so I fully agree. I fully agree with this perspective. Recently, so your message has always been like, get to 1 Bitcoin, you never fucking sell, right? I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, you did like a deep dive on eventually generating income with Bitcoin. Yeah, what's kind of the status there? Like, where are we at? Do you think it's already easy, quote unquote, or is it a bit too complex still? Like, for example, I think you have more financial experience than I do. When I hear you talk about it, I'm like, I don't know if this is for me yet, for example.
Yeah, look, I think again, the Bitcoin part is for everyone, right? I think when it comes to these Bitcoin being used by TradFi markets to monetize the volatility on the asset, that's when we start edging into the complicated part of how TradFi works. But now there are tools that you can use that. You can use an ETF like MSTY, for example, which basically sells front month covered calls and puts on MSTR to monetize the volatility on MSTR and pays out a dividend, right? I've been owning it now for 4 or 5 months, and I'm getting somewhere between 5 and 7% a month in dividends. Now, does that mean that that's going to also give me the same growth as MSTR? No, it doesn't. That's the whole point of it. When you're dealing with income markets, the point of an income market, a fixed income market, is to give people income. It's not about growth. So now Bitcoin, well, the point that I wanted to do was try and get Bitcoiners to become smarter about thinking about portfolios. So I was having this debate with a Bitcoiner that you've interviewed that I won't mention. And I told him, like, let's imagine that you hold $1 million of Bitcoin and I hold $1 million of Bitcoin, but I sacrifice growth on $100,000 of that, but that gives me a $5,000 a month income to live on. I'm a better hodler than you because you're selling down your $1 million of Bitcoin every single month to live on and hoping that the CAGR catches up to make up for how much you've sold in dollar terms. I'm not doing that. I'm holding the 90% because I've used 10% of it to generate income. Now, what does that mean? Well, based on what's happened with MSTY, you're getting about somewhere in the region of a third of the CAGR of MSTR, not including the dividends. So the funny thing is that still beats the QQQ. So I can take 10% of my portfolio, beat the NASDAQ, which has been the benchmark this whole time before Bitcoin.
That's the goal eventually, right?
Right. Yeah. I can beat the NASDAQ and generate a 5 to 7% a month dividend. And then that allows me to sit here on the other 90% and not even think about it. It makes people better hodlers when they have income. And Bitcoiners don't really like talking about income because, they don't understand it. They don't understand that the average person that's coming in now into Bitcoin, is a real estate investor, is someone who's in retirement, is someone who is looking for income. So I wanted to try and elevate the conversation a little bit so we can start talking about, okay, well, how do you become a better quality hodler by having income, even if it means sacrificing the full growth on a small percentage of your portfolio. And again, these are not, everything I'm talking about is not for the person who has $10,000 of Bitcoin. Remember, my audience, I don't care about that part of it. I'm talking about people like my parents who have been using real estate to generate an income, right? To grow their business, to live on and everything else. And now they have the ability to do that using Bitcoin. And using Bitcoin proxies, and that's only going to get bigger. Bitwise just released a fund where you can they're doing this on their own Bitcoin ETF, right? You literally generate a yield, and I assume it will come in at less than MSTR. It will probably come in at somewhere between 2.5% and 4% a month, but that's still huge. If you put $1 million into that, right? Let's say you got a $10 million portfolio, you put $1 million into that, you're making, depending on which one you use, somewhere between $25,000 and $75,000 a month to live on.
Yeah. When people eventually will do that more, like when the services grow, I heard you talk before, obviously, about getting to 1 Bitcoin, but that's also because you said, owning 1 Bitcoin could be enough to retire in the future, probably using these strategies. How did you arrive at 1 Bitcoin, actually? Is it just like the one of 21 million, or do you have some sort of like price model behind that, or what are your thoughts?
No, I look, firstly, it's easier to say 1 Bitcoin than 0.95 Bitcoin, right? Like it's just, it works from that point of view. But I think 1 Bitcoin is the inflection point. I think you've got to get to 1 Bitcoin, 1 out of 21 million. Sailors out here announcing 20,000 Bitcoin purchases. What people don't realize is the reason why I'm shouting about getting to 1 Bitcoin as quick as possible is when Sailor and MicroStrategy, by the way, I'm a big shareholder of MicroStrategy. I love it. But when they buy 20,000 Bitcoin, they have now stopped the dream of 20,000 people becoming altcoiners. Which is why I'm, as a MicroStrategy, as a strategy shareholder, as an MSTR shareholder, I'm shouting about you getting to 1 Bitcoin because I know what's going on the TradFi side, because I'm trusting Michael Saylor to take your dream of being a altcoiner away for me and for my legacy and for my progeny. The beautiful thing is, this is the beautiful thing about Bitcoin and about capital markets. You can fight that. You can get to 1 Bitcoin. It's all a race. And finally, we have an asset that's actually scarce. So we're all playing this game now. Michael Saylor's playing the same game that I'm playing. And I know that I can't borrow money the way that he borrows money. So I've now given him my capital in order to execute the strategy for me, just like every strategy investor.
I wonder how many people get this. the one of 21 million, I think, is what got me.
Yeah.
I've been using the analogy when I meet someone and I know they are a millionaire. I ask them, like, how many millionaires are there in the world? Like 59, 60 million, something like that. And then I ask, like, do you know how many Bitcoin there are in the world? And they're like, no. And I said, like, well, 21, maybe effectively 17. What you can buy is around 2 million Bitcoin, like on the market right now. So if you meet another millionaire and you say, like, and he says, well, nice Porsche, you can say, like, hey, that a Porsche is nice, but do you have 1 Bitcoin?
100%.
It's worked with 3 people or 4 people already. Where it's like,
the craziest part is with the whole, like, there's 60 million millionaires in the world. The crazy part about that is that how many of them can actually afford 1 Bitcoin? Because I know people with like $6-7 million of net worth that don't have $100,000 in spare liquidity to buy 1 Bitcoin. right? And the majority of those millionaires are lower level millionaires. So it's like, how many can actually afford? How many millionaires can afford one Bitcoin when we're over 100,000? And then what happens when we get to 200,000?
Yes. Yeah, I love thinking about that. Like the price is going to run away from people that could actually afford it now, right? Like, I mean, but that's where the asymmetry also is. And
by the way, just on the one Bitcoin thing, like I think it's important to have a North Star, right? And I'd rather make the point of a North Star is that it's far out for people, right? I would rather someone find a way to get to 0.7 Bitcoin because they were chasing one Bitcoin than be happy with 0.3 Bitcoin because someone on the fucking internet told them you can retire on 0.2 Bitcoin at some point.
Yeah, I think this is also where the opportunity is for many people. Like if you, for example, I recently talked to Peter Dunworth again. You know, he has a crazy long-term outlook, right? But once you, I think there's two very simple things, right? Like Bitcoin is not going away once you understand that. Like it's already here. It's a parallel system. You know, like as long as it's decentralized and secure, like it's not going away.
The Treasury Secretary of the United States of America is coming out here, not even being asked about it, and saying that it's becoming a store of value. If you think Bitcoin is going away at this point, you're a moron.
So it's not going away. There's only 21 million. It's verifiably, provably better than any other store of value asset that, you know, people are currently using to store their wealth. And even if you know, Jesse Myers has this great overview of like the total wealth in the world and very conservative calculations, how to get to like a $10 million Bitcoin price. Like it takes less than 10% of all the wealth to move. Yeah, once you see that and understand that, then I think it becomes more and more clear that you should just get as much Bitcoin as you can based on, you know, however much your net worth is now or what you can generate to actually buy that. And also that diversification. And I think you talked about that too, right? Like many financial advisors, they advocate for diversification, but yeah, you've argued that Bitcoin is the only asset that truly preserves value. You know, I obviously agree. People can verify that for themselves. Yeah, when will people realize that diversification is actually risky and that we're also, I'd say, are living in a moment in time where you could still get to one Bitcoin compared to maybe in 2 years, 3 years, 6 months, you know?
Yeah, look, I don't care. I don't care when those, but you know what I care about? I care about the fact that BlackRock came into the game, and the first thing they did, because I was like, okay, people are going to start getting it now. The lower level is for the lower bottom, the lower third of the triangle has kind of had this opportunity. Now it's going to go to people in the, you know, what you call high net worth, right? $500,000 to $30 million. And then it will go to the ultra high net worth. Larry Fink understood this better than I did. What he understood was that Bitcoin is a monetary network, not a human network. And what that means is Michael Saylor buying $1 billion worth of Bitcoin is the same to Bitcoin as 1 billion people buying $1 of Bitcoin. So what did Larry Fink do? President Fink went straight to the billionaires. I know people that are getting phone calls from their asset managers, and they're selling the same damn products, and the person with $100 million plus net worth is having a different conversation than the person with a $5 million net worth. They have completely skipped the 500,000 to $30 million net worth. They're focusing on the wealthy because that is the highest leverage point. They're focusing on ultra high net worth. That is the highest leverage point. These advisors have not been coached. They've not been taught to get the people who have got, you know, 500,000 to 30 million into Bitcoin. The advisors that have clients that are dealing with $100 million plus have been educated, and that's what's going on right now. The game is we're going to get as many dollars into Bitcoin as possible, and if it means I can talk to one person and get 10 times the amount of dollars than talking to 100 people, that's what I'm going to do.
That's exactly the fiat game that we talked about before, right? Like that's their advantage being high up in the fiat game. Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, that's also why we're talking about Bitcoin here to to reach others as well. Yeah.
Try and balance that out. That's what we're doing here.
Yes.
We are trying to balance that out. And at the end of the day, if it doesn't get balanced out, oh fucking well.
I mean, that's, again, yeah, all the information is out there, so you cannot really force people to adopt this, right? Like, I think that's the whole point. Also, when I see sometimes discussions when people say like, oh, I don't like that TradFi is into Bitcoin, etc., then I just think like, but Bitcoin is for enemy. The whole point is anyone can adopt Bitcoin, right? And I mean,
what those people are? Those people are freedom fighters.
I do think that eventually, if Bitcoin is actually, established in the financial world with, the same characteristics as it has now, as it had like 10 years ago, then we're still winning, because it will be a mirror for every other fiat fuckery game that exists. And slowly, and so I think it takes a lot of time, that will just shine through, and Bitcoin really will become like the hurdle rate. Like, you don't fuck around with Bitcoin. If you lose your Bitcoin, you're going to have to work harder to get that back, right? So people are going to be eventually, I think, more diligent in this entire financial game. When do
you think that happens? Do you think that happens at a $10 trillion market cap, a $50 trillion market cap, a $100 trillion market cap?
I think way further than we would hope. Right? I think it takes a long time. And
yeah,
I think that is.
I'll tell you when I think that happens. I think that happens at $100 trillion. The problem with that, the problem with what I've just said, is that at $100 trillion, Bitcoin's $5 million per coin, and every one of the people that you're trying to help is completely and utterly fucked from getting to one Bitcoin.
Yeah.
By the way, same with the audience I'm talking to, right? Because I can say that I'm talking to the $500,000 to $30 million net worth audience. I don't know many people with $30 million that have liquid $5 million to put into one thing that they've just learned about. Yeah. That's why this is important now.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
You got one. Listen, I've been saying this forever. You have one fucking chance. One. Because this ain't happening again, right? You've got one chance. And everyone that carries your last name is depending on you to get this right. That is the seriousness of this. This is not some crypto token. Doesn't matter about your power opinion. This doesn't matter about your fucking stock to flow. You have one fucking chance in the history of humanity to secure one Bitcoin.
I agree. Because if you talk to someone with 30 million and you say like, hey, do you want to put 5 million in a magic internet coin? Like it's not going to work. And so, by the way, on the one side, what we just talked about, I think that's going to take a long time. But what you are talking about now, that's going to take less than 9 years, maybe less than 2.
Yeah, I genuinely, I think that so there's two thoughts that I have about the current cycle theory, right? 4-year cycle theory. On the one side, I think that it doesn't make sense that BlackRock would want to get $50 billion of their investor assets into something that then goes up 400% in 4 months and then collapses 90% and stays there for 3 years. It just doesn't make sense. Plus, now there's tools in the market, right? Like if I want, let's say Bitcoin's selling off, right? And I want to plug that hole. You've got the options market that can do that. You can also call your bond desk up and say, right, give Saylor $10 billion of bond, of convertible bond money or fixed income market money. And now Saylor's got to put in the market. Like there's a lot of things that you can do to buoy the downside of Bitcoin volatility, right? Price volatility. At the same time, there is a risk here that the next 10 years of CAGR gets very focused into the next 4 years, right? So you can have a 10-year CAGR at 60% or 70% a year, but what if a lot of that is front-loaded into the next 4 years as we go through this capital saturation and capital adoption phase of Bitcoin? Well, then you've missed out, right? There's no point doing a linear compound analysis, because if the majority of that compounding comes in the next 4 years, you're screwed anyway. So it is really urgent at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I think this conversation has showed me that that is still true, right? I kind of forgot about it, but I think it's still true, and that's also why I like this idea about, you know, more like the global game theory and stuff. Like, even there has to be an inflection point where even countries that are on the sideline or somewhat thinking or even not thinking, like the EU, they're going to be forced at some point to, yeah, start participating in this parallel game, whether they understand it or not, actually, because yeah, it's just going to run away from them as well, I think.
You know, one of the smartest things that I think some of these Eastern Bloc countries in the EU can do is start buying up Bitcoin for their own personal treasury, because within a decade, they'll defund Germany from control of the EU.
So how much further do you see Bitcoin mature this year? Like, what is your price target? Obviously, we are, I don't know, 77, 76. I think this is a nice conviction check, you know?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I'm more bullish in the last 7 days than I was for the rest of the year. At least the beginning of the year, right? Like, the last 7 days has made me increasingly bullish, because President Trump understands liquidity. He understands the importance of liquidity, right? And he's orchestrating the scenarios that we're seeing right now to pump liquidity. China's going to pump liquidity. The EU is going to pump liquidity. The UK is going to pump liquidity. The US is going to pump liquidity. And if we see, you know, a liquidity expansion to the tune of what, you know, even 50% of what we saw during COVID, but with the advancements in the amount of education that capital has had about Bitcoin, you're going to see an explosive growth here. I'm more bullish than I was at the beginning of the year at this point.
Are there any big
That's why
challenges?
I sold my watches.
Yeah. That was what someone asked on X. I have two questions from X also. Yeah, I think it's that. Yeah, I just told you, like, I want to sell some too. Like, I feel like this week is a extraordinary opportunity, or maybe the coming 2 weeks. But yeah, yeah, some short questions, I think, to wrap it up. Do you see any challenges like on the horizon, or like what are the things that you are paying attention to with regards to your own thesis?
The only challenge to anyone is themselves at this point, right? Like, if you are shit scared out of the market because you don't understand how liquidity games work in drawdowns like this, then you are your number one challenge. I don't see any other challenges at all. I see that President Fink is in charge here. BlackRock has decided that Bitcoin is digital gold. People are moving towards Bitcoin, and liquidity will be pumped into the markets and will find its way into Bitcoin. I do not see any other challenges at this point.
All right, two questions from X. Could be you find them stupid after this conversation, but I think it's fun. It's a fun question. What would cause you to declare Bitcoin a failure?
I think the US would have to reverse all policy on Bitcoin. I think that you would have to see price come down 90% and just stay there with no hopes of resurgence. Mm-hmm. I think you would probably have to see liquidity be pumped into the markets and prices just dropping at the same time, which I don't think is going to happen. I don't know. I really, like, that's a really good question. I think it all depends on US policy.
Ties into this question. Let's say Bitcoin crashes to 12K tomorrow. I like this question. What's your copium plan to convince everyone it's bullish?
Oh well, at that point we'd have to get Jerome. We have to roll Jerome Powell out and show everyone the Superman outfit that he wears underneath the suit. But hey, here, look, whoever asked that question, I'll tell you one thing: Uncle Bullish will find a way to make you bullish. Don't worry, you can depend on me for that.
All right, last question. What? Maybe you shared it already, but like, is there a current point of view that you have on Bitcoin that you think not many people share with you?
Yeah, I think that people really are underestimating the power of BlackRock and the capital saturation on this asset and how fast that can come. And I've kept saying this to people: go study the adoption of Tesla as a must-own asset in 2019, because that is coming for Bitcoin, right? Go understand how liquidity moves once the narrative changes and how fast that can come. I still do not think people are coming up with this 60, 70% CAGR. It's going to slip down to 40%, et cetera, et cetera. I think people are going to be caught very much off guard with how fast the capital comes in once the go signs are hit.
All right, man. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for this nice update. And yeah, man, stay in touch.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for a next episode. Bye.